This stuff is scaring me. This stuff is really scaring me. So, I don't know if you saw this. There's been a breakdown of American-Ukrainian relations in the last 24 to 48 hours. It's been somewhat happening and building up a bit leading up to this period, but it's gotten pretty bad in the last 48 hours. Now, when I say breakdown of relations, it's not like we've closed down the embassy or we're no longer talking, but we're watching the leaders of two countries clash, Zelensky and Trump, and we're watching the meetings start to get canceled as more concessions are seemingly publicly given to the Russians, and the Ukrainians are asked to concede more and more with nothing reciprocally being given, and with terms that the Ukrainians are not happy with. And so we're seeing what could be a breakdown of Trump's relationship with the Ukrainians, which would not only mean a breakdown of the American-Ukrainian relationship, but of course a breakdown possibly of the peace process or ceasefire process, and a possible breakdown of the continuation of aid, since Trump has not sent a single aid package, approved one, since he has gone into office. Okay, now, Donald Trump, in this back and forth with Zelensky over whether he is going to sign a minerals deal that would see $500 billion, according to Trump, worth of Ukrainian mineral wealth sent over, given in value to the United States, which there's two things to say here. Number one, the United States has not sent that much value to Ukraine in military aid. We've sent like maybe 110 billion, and we've had other billions invested here domestically, where Trump's asking for 500 billion. And mind you, that aid support was promised in the 90s if Russia ever invaded, for them giving up their atomic weapons. There was never, hey, you're going to have to pay for X, Y, and Z in that contract. And then this isn't a contract for future aid. This is a contract to cover previous aid. So Ukraine would give up half of all of its natural resources, as well as strategic ports and exclusive commercial rights to the United States in some areas, and a lot of areas, mind you. And in exchange, Ukraine's debts would be covered, and then they could start trying to angle for more aid. It doesn't seem like a good deal. And so that's why Zelensky rejected it. And he's like, let's have a different deal. And then he offered the Treasury Secretary and Marco Rubio a different idea. No, it was J.D. Vance, actually. And the last I heard about it, and this is one example of the breakdown of relations, is Mike Waltz went on Fox News and basically said that the Ukrainians are making too much noise and they need to make a long story short, shut up and take the deal. Mike Waltz, for those of you who do not know, is Donald Trump's national security advisor. So the Trump administration wants Ukraine to not only publicly kind of go along with these concessions are being made, they're not including them at the table. He's saying there's no need to include the Ukrainians at the table. Trump has given that hint publicly by saying they could have been included in the last 3 years. Now I'm here. It's our turn to be included. And as that's all going on, they're telling them to just shut up and take the deal, with no long-term commitment to what the ceasefire is going to look like, what this peace deal is going to look like, and what type of aid they're really going to see in the future. Mind you, this is the big point, though, that I kind of avoided. Ukraine has a GDP of 170 billion. What Trump's asking for is $500 billion. That would be a greater debt cost on Ukraine than than was put on the Germans after the First World War, as a percentage. We're making the Ukrainians go through and look, there's other ways where obviously the Versailles Treaty does not match here, but when we're talking about the amount of debt, the amount of financial burden we're placing upon them, as well as the standard we're setting, because hey, if the Ukrainians have to pay us half of their natural resources for $110 billion, well, then the Europeans have more.
Trump is going to remove sanctions from Russia and place sanctions on Ukraine if they don't go along with his peace deal?
I think sanctions on Ukraine would be very hard to sell the public. I think it would be polling disastrous, but I can't leave anything off the table at this point. And I could see Trump saying something like that off the cuff before his advisors try to walk it back. I could see something like that happening. I would like to think that it is unlikely, though. Thank you for the $5. I appreciate it. The other big reason why it makes it difficult for, say, Ukraine to accept a deal like this, outside of the fact that, you'd be giving up, half of their mineral wealth, is that Ukraine's, GDP is $170 billion. if they're giving up $500 billion in value, or even like half of that to the United States, then what type of standard does that set? If the United States gets $500 billion worth of value from Ukraine in mineral wealth for $110 billion in actuality of like assistance that actually went to Ukraine, didn't get spent here, but went to Ukraine. The Europeans sent more than that. And Ukraine's right there in Europe. Ukraine is right in the backyard of Europe. If we can get $500 billion worth of value, why can't the Europeans get $400 billion or 500? If they sent more, in fact, why not $800 billion? Why not put Ukraine in the amount of debt not only necessary to rebuild their shattered country, but also make it as expensive as the Iraq war as well, on top of the normal everyday war costs that they've been spending, which is like 60 to 70% of their entire budget. Why not just make it physically impossible for the Ukrainians to ever dream that they could have financial stability or a country that isn't burdened by endless debt from those who didn't tell them that this was the deal, but then changed the contract after it was signed and then said, pray we do not change it again. So right now, the relationship between Kiev and Washington is more frigid than, I would even say, at the worst parts of the Biden administration. Easily. And then Donald Trump decides to go out and say this as that mineral deals did not go through. If maybe to add pressure, but also after the meeting in Saudi Arabia, where Donald Trump seemed to sign on to the idea that the Ukrainians, as part of any deal, will have to host elections. And I'll talk about why the Ukrainians are nervous about this in a second, but let's first play this clip.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, or essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. The whole, I mean, so many of the cities. I mean, they haven't done it in Kiev because I guess they don't want to shoot too many rockets in there. They've done it 20%, but they haven't done it 100%. If they wanted to do it 100%, it would probably happen very quickly. But you have cities that are absolutely decimated. And yeah, I would say that, you know, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people have to, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, you know, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also.
Okay, so there's a lot. I'll just show you how to get through this quick, okay? Number one, the Russians haven't been fighting for 3 years with their hands tied behind their back because they're just such nice people. And, you know, when they're bombing cancer wards in Kiev, that's just them, you know, with, you know, pillows on their fists. No, it's that the Russians don't have an endless supply of missiles. It's estimated like 50% of the artillery they're using is North Korean. Russia, while it's a very big country, does not have an endless supply of long-distance, highly accurate missiles, and also has its own economic constraints. It has a lot of old Soviet reserves, and it has taken those reserves and thrown them again and again at Ukraine. It is continuing to throw them at Ukraine. But the idea that they've only used like 20% of their power, it's Frieza in their first transformation. It's gonna, you know, it's, oh, you don't know, he's gonna power up in the, no, it's not. This is the thing that scares me, is that he's in these meetings with Putin. Putin's like, you know, at any time I could totally crush Kiev. And he's like, damn, I didn't know. Oh, we're in such a bad... He doesn't know. And when he's in there with Marco Rubio and RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, we're not talking regional experts here leading the way. Even like Mike Waltz, it's not regional experts leading the way. And so I worry about him easily getting manipulated like this in these meetings and then going out and publicly repeating it to the public. And what better way to, you know, boost Russian misinformation than to just directly send it to the people through the mouths of the American president, the president that they elected. And it's given credibility through his election. The other thing here, as to the 4%, well, let's say the other thing first before the 4%. Why would the Russians, and why would they be pushing for an election? The reason is simple. And he talked about it here, he mentioned martial law, and that's the underlying thing that's more important about the election. If Zelensky was to have an election right now, as long as Zelensky, which is like a very popular general, did not run, there's a really good chance he would probably win. In fact, I would go further to say that because of the attacks on Zelensky by Trump, Elon, and the rest of these people, Zelensky's approval rating is probably going to go up in the next poll. You can go check the Kiev Institute of Sociology in March. Maybe wait till April, wait for it to like fully register and more people to learn about this competition. I don't know, but just wait. I think it will. If not, at least stay where it is. I don't think it's going to be like, oh, Trump hates them, but I think it will increase, because I think that when there's a general rally around the flag effect, especially for a person that is being so ridiculously lied about, because 4% is Trump at his worst. 4%. 4%. Let's think about that number really. You're an American citizen sitting on your couch trying to listen to the president, trying to figure out if this war is ending or not, and you hear the president of Ukraine, which, by the way, has a higher approval rating in the United States than Donald Trump has, just throwing that out there, 4%. 4%. This would mean that Zelensky has a lower approval rating than the South Korean president, who just tried to do a military coup over his country and then afterwards says, whoopsie daisies. And then some of his defenders came out and said, well, he was a little lonely. In fact, not only would his approval rating be higher, it would be 4 times as high as Zelensky, the guy who's been trying to fight for his country, defend his country for 3 years. And look, I'm not saying Zelensky, the people of Ukraine, overwhelmingly worship Zelensky like he's some king. He has a slight approval rating of over 50%. A slight approval rating. The last, I think, in December of last year was about 52%. The most recent polling data has him at 57%. So it has gone up. It has gone up. But 4% is such a ridiculous lie. This is Trump at his worst. This is Trump thinking, I just won the second election. It doesn't matter if I lie. It doesn't matter if I tell the truth. I can lie about anything at any time as long as it benefits me. I can lie about infectious diseases and that the sun's going to make it go away. I can lie about wars. I can lie about death. I can lie about aid numbers. I can lie about the amount of people who are injured or dead. I can lie about Ukrainian, American, Russian, or history. I can lie about the polling data. I can lie about where the war is going. I can lie about the state of the war. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the American people know that Donald Trump lies, and they just keep electing him. And they keep electing the people who support him. So I think from his perspective, putting aside whether or not the American people would really accept in a yes or no basis, are you okay with Donald Trump lying to you? Probably not. But Donald Trump has gotten the signal that whether it's due to the political environment and the lack of strong competition or whatever, that he can just lie, take the benefits from lying and getting up a storm of anger where people are just hearing kind of like rumors about the war that vibes them one way or the other and not based in a conversation about the reality on the ground. He can do that with little to no consequence. And that's what's happening, because this 4% number, my first thought was that he got this from Russian state TV. Or that Putin said this to him in a meeting and he actually believed it. And you want to know what? I'm wrong. I don't think that's the case. It's possible still, but I don't think the case. And the reason I don't think the case is because if you go to Russian state TV, RT, Russia Today, and they're covering the story, let me read you the first 3 paragraphs of Russia Today and compare that to what the President of the United States just said. U.S. President Donald Trump's claim that Volodymyr Zelensky's approval ratings are dangerously low is Russian disinformation, the Ukrainian leader has insisted, claiming that a majority of Ukrainians trust his leadership. During a White House press conference following a meeting between U.S. and Russian officials in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on Tuesday, Trump suggested that Zelensky approval rating is actually 4%. The Kiev Institute of Sociology said on Wednesday, however, that in a survey in January, 57% of Ukrainians expressed trust in Zelensky, an increase of 54% in the last month. And I went through the rest of this article, wait a second, where's this 4%? Where's this 4%? Are they going to cite something for 4%? Are they going to say it's possible? Are they going to, and look, if you look through this, it still like repeats a few Russian talking points, as Russia State TV, of course. They don't back up the 4% number. They don't say it's one of ours. The only number they cite is the 57% number I cited, meaning that Donald Trump is pushing harder, less to believe propaganda. I mean, less likely to be believed, harder to believe propaganda than Russian state media. And he's doing it completely on the cuff, just shooting from the hip. I mean, this isn't even slightly believable. Nobody can defend this. Nobody. Not even his dumbest supporters. Almost nobody. Let me go through some of the people who have tried. But first, I want to show you Zelensky's response to all of this mess, which we talked about in a second. It was mentioned in the RT piece. Which Zelensky seems to believe that Trump is in a disinformation space. He's surrounded by people like Tulsi and RFK. At least that's my naming of names. And those people are filling his ear with bullshit. And that's what's leading to a lot of this confrontation. That's what he said.
President Trump is someone who we respect a lot as a leader of the nation that we really respect, the American nation, who supported us all the time. Unfortunately, he lives in a disinformation space.
That's it. That's all he's really said. I respect Trump, I respect America, but I think he lives in a disinformation space. And look, this was my big complaint. I said, and I remember talking to Jeb Tan, I remember talking to all these conservatives on election night. Like, look, if he gets Tulsi through there, oh, they're not going to get Tulsi through there. They got Tulsi through there. Once they get Tulsi through there, she's going to be the one giving him an intelligence briefing. If RFK's in there, he's going to be whispering in her ear. They're all going to be whispering in his ear. If he's bringing Jack Posobiec into his diplomatic missions, you're not bringing Ukrainian expertise. You're bringing people with negative knowledge or those who have a perverse incentive to undermine the Ukrainian position. And so I didn't think that, you know, the intelligent,
morally corrupt
Ukraine experts were going to win the day, because most of those people are despised by members of the Trump admin. Now, I didn't completely give up all hope, because, you know, human beings are just busting with hope. But, you know, we're starting to see the effects of that, and Zelensky seems to be worried about it. John Kovic, thank you so much for the tier 1 sub. I appreciate it. Let me read to you what Donald Trump posted on Truth Social and following up on this back and forth diplomatic breakdown. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion. Now, every time he says this number, it just gets bigger. Every time the last number, it was 300 billion. Now, that's, again, we've sent them about 110. So this is more than 3 times the amount we've actually sent over to Ukraine. Now, you can find some money that was spent domestically to make American factories that also contribute, like shells, which are then also sent to Ukraine and also evaluated within the aid. But that's not sent to Ukraine. And still, even if you included that, it's still like 3 times the size. So, just, again, lie. There's just so much going on at the same time that the people just can't register all these lies. It's impossible for them not to seep through at least somewhat into the American psyche. To go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start. Now, the way he talks about it, they talked us into spending all this money to go into a war that couldn't be won. Mind you, the Russians invaded. Depending upon what your goal was, stopping Russia from taking over Ukraine, that could be a sort of victory. It depends on what your goals are. Like America going into a war and saying like, hey, our goal here in the Korean War is to like destroy communism in Asia. You're never going to reach that goal, but if your goal is to preserve Seoul and the South Korean government, you can achieve that goal. But if your goal was reunite Korea, well, you didn't achieve that goal. And so when you talk about the Korean War, did we win? Did we lose that war? Maybe you can call it a tie. We won the goal of making sure South Korea survived after the North invaded, but we didn't win the goal of what MacArthur wanted, which was to unite Korea against communism. So, like, a war that couldn't be won. Won to what goal? If the goal is to stop the Russians from conquering Ukraine, it certainly can be won. It undoubtedly can be won. It's a question of whether we'll put in the effort to help that happen. That never had to start. But a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, capital letters, and quoted as if it's a brand. He's like, the Trump brand. If you without the U.S. and the Trump brand. I mean, look at the way he quotes his own name and capitalizes it. It's like he can't live without watching his name branded. We'll never be able to set her. So, the United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe. Just lie. I mean, I don't know what to say, man. Like, just like, Europe is well ahead of the United States in aid. It's been like this since early 2024. I think it might have even been like this since late 2023. I don't remember, but certainly early 2024. It's been like this well over a year. But Trump just keeps saying it because it's easy to make the Americans hate the Europeans by just saying, look at those lazy, baguette-eating Europeans as we spend all the money on blowing everything up. Remember the Iraq War? We're blowing stuff up over there, and now we're spending all the money, with the war stuff, and they're once again being lazy and not spending money. It's just easy to say because we've had this relationship where the Europeans haven't really carried their fair share for so long that he can just say this and he just doesn't get checked. And if you're on the campaign trail, are you going to be Kamala Harris standing up for France in a debate with Donald Trump on who should be president of the United States? Or are you just going to ignore it, let it fester, because you don't want to make it look like you're sticking your neck out for the foreign country and not your own? It puts you in a tough position where you just ignore the lies, or you hope that your social media teams and your rapid response teams are able to put content out there to, counter it, but it's hard to take on straight on. And so this has settled and it has rested, and now a lot of people think it's the case that we are the ones carrying the vast majority of the burden when it is the Europeans who have sent the vast majority of the aid to Ukraine. Why didn't Sleepy Joe demand equalization? And this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean of separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. This is a lie. So Zelensky said, well, this is what happens. Zelensky hears Trump go out there and he says, we sent them $1 trillion. And then Zelensky will go out there and instead of saying, when we were sent $1 trillion, because they weren't sent $1 trillion, he'll cite a number like, we were supposedly supposed to be sent $200 billion, but I don't know where all this money went. And the money that he's referencing is two things. Number one, the replenishment funds. So part of aid to Ukraine, a lot of it, in fact, was not aid to Ukraine. But it wasn't like aid to the cartels like some other psychopaths like Tucker Carlson say. It was aid to the United States, actually. It was bill included in this legislation, like the $60 billion aid package. Like a good 10 to 20 billion of that was replenishing American stocks. So that means artillery shells for American stockpiles. That means armored vehicles, new armored vehicles, as we send old armored vehicles to the Ukrainians to replace that. And so when he's referencing like, oh, where's this money? He's saying, oh, this 30 billion that you say is supposed to be aid to Ukraine. Where is it? You want to know what the answer is? It's in American warehouses. That's the point. The point's where's the aid? It's still in America. A lot of these aid bills, a lot of it was just to replenish old stocks. Where's the rest of it? Well, a lot of it was to build American factories in America making shells. And that helps Ukraine because more shells being made means more aid that could be sent to Ukraine. But if you just expand shell production and then not send more shells to Ukraine, then that was not aid to Ukraine. That was just building up an American factory and using Ukraine as an excuse to build up a weapons manufacturer. And then you're not using it for its intended purpose. I would even say, while it's not illegal, it would be in the spirit of a misappropriation of funds because it was passed under the assumption that the shells would continue to go. And then if it doesn't, you're not using it for its intended purpose. But I mean, that's common on Washington. Just look at how the AUMF was used ever since that was authorized. Anyway, let's continue. He refuses to have elections. Is very low in Ukrainian polls. And the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. Now, this is a theme that Donald Trump's repeated. He said in other press conferences, like maybe Ukraine will be Russia, maybe it won't be Russia. As if that, for him, an acceptable outcome is Russia completely conquering Ukraine. Like maybe that will happen, maybe it won't happen. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Now he'll say, what, don't you back Ukraine? Oh, of course I back Ukraine. They just need to remember, maybe Ukraine won't exist. It's the general theme of Like, come on, you got to remember the situation you're in, buddy. Remember, we're the ones with the power here, buddy. And a dictator without election. To be clear, under this framework, Winston Churchill was the dictator of Great Britain. If you're willing to say Winston Churchill was the dictator of Great Britain, and Great Britain is not a democracy because they had the ability to pause elections during periods of national crisis, like if they were invaded, which is the situation Ukraine's in right now, and is what its constitution written in the 90s said, that if you're in, if you go into a state of martial law because you're being conquered, you go into a period of suspended elections until the martial law period's ended and you resume it, because holding elections when 20% of your country's occupied, millions of your people are displaced, and polling stations could literally be bombed, is kind of difficult. That's not to even mention the fact that he did mention the period of martial law during the reading. If martial law was to end and it wasn't a permanent ceasefire, and Ukrainians knew it probably wasn't a permanent ceasefire, that could lead to a lot of Ukrainians leaving. Because once ceasefire is over, the restriction on men leaving is gone. And so let me just be bluntly honest with you guys. I think part of the reason why the Russians are going to be insistent about an election. Let me ask you this. Do you think the Russians care about democracy? Do you think the Russians care whether the Ukrainian people's voice are heard or not? Probably not if you're going to kill all these people. Probably not if you're going to conquer them and try to ignore the democratically elected government, and you won't even negotiate with their democratically elected government. So why are they asking for an election? Why do the Russians think that if there was an election in Ukraine right now, they'd elect Arestovich, or they would elect somebody like we're going to pick Scott Ritter to lead Ukraine and he's going to bring our peoples in? No. So there must be some other purpose for the Russians asking for there be an election in Ukraine, right? It's not like we're asking for the Russians to hold an election in Russia. We just accept face value that Russia's not a democracy. That's fine. But we got to hold Ukraine to the standard of having an election, even though, we wouldn't hold that standard to Winston Churchill for us to send him aid. We're holding that standard over to Zelensky. What if the reason they want an election to happen is that if you were to end the martial law, men over the age of 18 can freely leave the country? And if the Ukrainians know the war is going to start again, don't think America's coming their assistance, and now can leave the country, and there's like intermediate frozen bombing. Like, for example, Trump says there was no attacks on Ukraine when he was president. That's a lie. In 2017, Avdiivka was attacked. There were attacks. It was on a smaller scale that makes this, that looks like peanuts compared to what's going on now. But if that continues to happen after Minsk 3 or whatever, then what you have is a bunch of the 20% of the country occupied, millions already displaced, some might return, some won't return, and others will leave because they don't want to, be caught up in the next wave of violence. While Russia has a population size 4 times the size of them. So it'd be an opportunity for people to leave Ukraine, for Russia to rebuild, and possibly to attack Ukraine's electoral system. But that is speculation. That's speculation on my part. All this is speculation, but I would say that's the most speculative. So the purpose, I think, would be to drain the Ukrainian state. And now I'm not saying that there shouldn't be elections in Ukraine, but I am saying that if the period of martial law is going to end, it has to end with an understanding that there's an actual end to the violence. Because if it ends and there's not, then the Russians will simply kick the can down the road and there'll be an invasion in a few years, and this was merely a pause, and everybody trying to end the war, quote unquote, is merely trying to pat themselves on the back, and they're trying to have their Joseph Kony moment, Kony 2012 moment. Even though, of course, Kony was a bad guy, but if you just go out there and say, "Yay, Joseph Kony," and then go away after and don't care if what's going on a month later, you've achieved nothing. If you stop the fighting for 5 seconds and then they start fighting again, you've achieved nothing. Let's finish this, though. There's so much here to break down, and this is the point. You just fire so much that it just takes so much time to break down. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something I'll admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train growing. So in his mind, it's like, the way he's presenting it is like, oh, Zelensky loves war. He loves to, do this. He just wants all of our money. That's all it is. It's not that he wants to be in the best position to negotiate the future of his country, like somebody who wrote a book called Art of the Deal might understand. It's that he just likes American money. This is just, this is all fun and games. Oh, he just likes money. He likes the mansions. He likes the Ferraris. All that Russian disinformation about the Ferraris and all that bullshit, put aside like any real shit with the Panama Papers. It's all to build up towards this. It's all the money we're sending over, just going to Ferraris. It's all just a gravy train. So, if we have to strong arm Zelensky and give up his land and, let a few mass graves build. We're avoiding the gravy train. This is all just to keep it, he just wants to make money. It's not about what's best for Ukraine. Because Trump knows what's best for Ukraine. Listen to him. I love Ukraine. But Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. Again, another lie. Where he gets his number from, who fucking knows? And so it continues. Anyway, after this was thrown out to the public, Elon Musk then jumped on board with, as well, the Presidential Rapid Response 47 team. So for those of you who don't know, this is basically the Trump administration's response team. This is like his staff. When something's said, when the president's like too busy, they can go out and they can respond on the president in the White House behalf. That's what rapid response is supposed to do. So let's say that like somebody says something about like says a lie about the IRS. The rapid response would come out. Somebody said the IRS misfiled this taxes. That's not true. XXYZ. That's what they're supposed to do. They put out a post saying, in America, we hold a presidential election every 4 years, even during wartime. Yeah, guys, remember when we held that election during the Iraq War? Oof, I was really scared Saddam was gonna kidnap my grandma in fucking in Baltimore. Get out! Come on. This isn't comparable. This is, you're an American. You're sheltered. You're when it comes to this, a pussy. And I'm not trying to be mean, but like if you're like, hey, when we invaded Iraq, we still had an election. That's across the ocean, dude. It's a little different when it's in your backyard. We held an election during the Civil War. This is the only example that is somewhat comparable, because that means war on American soil, we still had an election. But here's why it's not comparable. Back then, the top like mustache style curled up with on the sides, everybody getting killed by mosquitoes and dying of diarrhea out in the field. And you have to stand still for an hour to get a still of a picture of your great-great-grandpa looking like... Let's just say the times have changed a bit. And I think the most major way the times have changed is back then, to kill a man, you had to stand in a single file line, aim at them, fire, and then stand as you went like... Now, of course, by then it had sped up since the Revolutionary War. But now compare that and the distance that cannons and, say, that type of rifle fire can go. Now compare that to a drone. Or, say, a long-range missile, which Russia fires at Ukraine every day. Now change those targets from just, military construction facilities or the odd hospital to polling stations. Also take into consideration the amount of displaced people and occupied people, which that's not too different from Civil War, but it is a little different when it comes to the bombing campaign. It's also a little different when it comes to the opponent the United States was fighting. The United States was fighting a rebellion in its south, right? Where it was the larger country with more industry, with more men. The Ukraine has 1/4 the population size of Russia. This is not comparable. This is comparable only if you're sheltered. We held an election during World War II. There were no Nazis in Idaho fighting tooth and nail to take over the land. That didn't happen. This is not comparable examples. Now, I wanted to move forward in this area to Elon Musk, because Elon Musk decided that he was going to open his mouth on this, because that's what he decides on every single topic he ever interacts with ever. And he responded to this post by Amos. Now, he decided to boost this. What does this look like to you on first appearance? Once you see this image, you know what I get, the implication I get when I see this image. Oh, this looks like a newspaper article. This looks like maybe not Washington Post, but it looks like it's some publication of some sort. Maybe of some repute. of some reliability. This is just this person on Twitter. This is just this person on Twitter. There's nothing else. It's just this person on Twitter made a special article-like format so he can make posts on Twitter like this. Look, Amuse on X. Buy Amuse. Subscribe on X. Subscribe to Amuse on X. That's what this is. Just social media. So this is just him on Twitter. Ukraine claims that Zelensky has an approval rating of 57% are from the Kiev International Institute of Sociology, which received U.S. aid funding for its polling. It is run by a very patriotic Ukrainian named Anton Goretsky. It is unlikely that the polling is credible. The U.S. intel community estimates support at around 4%, which is the number Trump has been citing. Don't bet against Trump. And then Elon boosted this, saying, unfortunately, community notes is increasingly being gamed by governments and legacy media. The reason why is when people would cite Ukraine, like 4%, that's ridiculous. Of course that isn't real, because it isn't. Like community notes would say, yeah, it isn't real. And so Elon's angry at community notes for saying 4% isn't the real number. Working to fix this. So when the community notes just gives him an answer he doesn't like, because the truth isn't nice, always, to your opinions, he just fixes it. It should be utterly obvious that a Zelensky-controlled poll about his own approval is not credible. He's so incompetent. He fucking acts like an expert on everything. It isn't a Zelensky-controlled poll. It isn't. The Kiev Institute of Sociology. By the way, like, let's listen to like the things that they're saying. It's run by a very patriotic Ukrainian. A Ukrainian poll was done by a Ukrainian living in Ukraine at a Ukrainian institute. What a surprise. Who would have thought? Hey, guess what? I just saw a Bulgarian poll. You want to know who did it? Bulgarians. You want to know what that Bulgarian thinks? His country should not all die. Wow. That doesn't seem very credible. We need somebody who's neutral on the existence of Bulgaria to poll Bulgarians. Could you imagine that? We get a YouGov poll. We get any poll in the United States on American issues or American people or whatever. And we like, do they think America should exist? Yeah? Well, obviously that's a rigged poll if they think America should exist. That's a rigged poll. He's too patriotic. He shouldn't be allowed to poll people. We can't use that data. Don't look at the methodology. Don't look at whether the data is real. And by the way, go to their polling data before the war. They didn't just get in creation. It's not like a government created institute that just like popped out of existence at the start of the war. They polled people on Zelensky before the war. You know what the polling data said before the war? That Zelensky had an approval rating of just barely over 30%. So Zelensky controlled polls. Zelensky told them to say, hey, say that we're about to slip into the 20s. He said, I would like it if it looks like we're about to go to 29% in my approval rating. Could you do that for me? I just want to have a record comeback. I want to be known as the Rocky of Ukrainian politics. So Zelensky controls it, but they gave him shit polling data before the war. And then after he invades and he stays, his polling data goes up to 70%, 80%. And since then, it's gone down to 50 as that, rally around the flag effect is worn off. And now that he's under siege again by Elon, I bet you again, like I said earlier, it's going to go back up. But again, his only source is a person on Twitter because it got U.S. aid money. If it got U.S. aid money, that doesn't mean the polling's not credible. Look at the methodology. If Ukrainians can't poll Ukrainians, then Americans can't poll Americans, then Russians can't poll Russians, and the vast majority of polling data on Earth is useless. And even if you say that the poll is somewhat biased, even if you admit, if you were to say, like, you know what, U.S. aid money did change it. I don't admit that, but let's say it did. To 4%, this is showing that Elon Musk is willing to die on any hill to brown-nose Trump and to go after the Ukrainians. If Zelensky was actually loved, we're reading this thing again, actually loved by the people of Ukraine, he would hold an election. He knows he would lose in a landslide, despite having seized control of all Ukrainian media, so he canceled the election. In reality, he is despised by the people of Ukraine, which is why he has refused to hold an election. I challenge Zelensky to hold an election and refute this. He will not. President Trump is right to ignore him and solve for peace independent of the disgusting, massive grift machine feeding off of the dead bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. Elon should be put on the front line for like a week. He should be put on a forward operating position, and he should have to sit there as drone after drone after drone hits his position. That's what I think. Because for you to drag out their corpses, be like, how dare you? Like he's Pergozin on TV yelling, Shoigu Gurisimov, pointed at the corpses, poking them with a stick, saying, this is your fault. That's what he's doing with these dead Ukrainians. Saying that, oh, this is just a grift machine. That they taken all this, but maybe that means they're taking the shells and they sent it to the cartels, or they sent it to this, sent it to that. That's what Tucker Carlson said. Another person in Elon's orbit that he likes quite a lot and has recommended people to go listen to his program on the war. Go listen to people say that, hey guys, the cartels are actually getting all the money. The cartels are actually getting all the gun, no matter if it's a lie or not. Elon Musk has never been to Ukraine. Elon Musk is not friends with many Ukrainians. I don't think he talks to many Ukrainians. He doesn't know basically anything about Ukrainian history, and every time he talks about it, it's very evident. He doesn't know anything about war. When he says stuff like, guys, we don't need to keep building jets. We can just replace them all with drones. He doesn't know anything about how drones get jammed and why. Like, the vast majority of drones I see go fly out to attack a position, they never reach the position because they get jammed or shot down. You can't really jam a person's brain in the same way as they're flying a jet. But he doesn't understand these things. He gets a surface level understanding of an issue, then he pretends to be like an expert on it. And he does it again and again and again and again and again. But for him to do that and then assert himself so confidently, and would attack the president of Ukraine and then back up Trump in these disgusting attacks on him. Remember, Elon back in 2022, March 4th, he was waving around the Ukrainian flag. He was saying, yay, Ukraine, go, go, go. But look how much he's degraded in 3 years. The disgusting, massive grift machine feeding off dead bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. The grift machine. It's just become like a Russian Today mouthpiece. That's what this sounds like to me. This doesn't sound anything different than I would expect to hear from any of their English-speaking programs that they produced before or during the war. They're despised by the people of Ukraine. Like, he just wants reality to be this way, so he declares it to be so. Honestly, Elon is an NPC. I see him just see whatever Trump says, go out there, defend it tooth and nail, and never have to reflect on it. 4%, you believe that shit. If you do, you're a moron. If you think that the vast majority of Ukrainians despise Zelensky, you're a moron. He's never been to Ukraine. He'd certainly be welcome there if he went there. Not by the people, mind you. They'd probably yell at him. But the government would show him around, try to teach him something. But he refuses to learn. And is now taking out his lack of knowledge on the Ukrainian people. He did this while kids are dying in trenches on the war front. Zelensky and wife raise his eyebrow by posing for glossy Vogue cover. Who would have thought that the media-focused individual like Zelensky would go around to media publications and try to yell as loudly as possible? The reason that we're still talking about this war, in part, is because Zelensky kept trying to bring attention to it. Look, Vogue isn't like the most war-focused publication, but the fact that they're trying to go to as many audiences as possible to talk about the war, that's what you guys wanted Trump to do. You wanted Trump to go on Aiden Ross's program, no matter the types of anti-Semites or horrible people that they posted on there. You wanted Trump to go on these podcasts. You wanted Trump to go on this. You wanted Trump to go on that. But Zelensky takes this photo like this, where he's just holding his wife's hand. Like, wow. Why are you pissing on the bodies of dead Ukrainians? Fuck you. You piss on the bodies of dead Ukrainians every time you open your mouth. And the thing is, these lies just keep building. And there's no effort in them anymore. It's just the hope that nobody knows how to Google anything. Or not even that nobody knows how to Google. That nobody has the common decency or the respect for themselves to go out and do their own research. Trump claimed that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent traveled to Kiev by train, but that Zelensky was sleeping. He was just taking a little snooze, and so he decided to not meet with the U.S. Treasury Secretary. Here's the problem. I know people that were there. They told me how the meeting went. I know he was there. I've seen the pictures. This is a picture. He's right there. Does Zelensky look like he's in sleeping attire? He's got a little nightcap and he's in a little gown. Whoo! No, he's awake, wide awake. He's right there. These lies don't make any sense. This is so easy to disprove. There's the picture. If you ever wondered how people could see pictures of the Holocaust and still be Holocaust deniers, it's this type of denial. It's cultishness. It's that you don't want it to be. You just want everything that's negative about the people you don't like, either because you're falling into some contrarian rabbit hole, you're some random fascist, you're in the Trump, whatever it is, so you just believe it. Trump says he didn't meet with Scott Bessent. He must have not. Picture shows that he did. Fake. Doesn't matter. Trump is not to be trusted on this. I'm sorry. Somebody needs to shut him up and just have Keith Kellogg handle this. It has to just be Keith Kellogg. Dylan, you just have TDS. I must just have TDS. I must just have TDS because I don't like it when the president of the United States lies about our diplomatic. I want to wonder who's the problem here when it comes to our negotiating. Is the person who constantly lies and is demanding that they basically own a majority of Ukraine's natural wealth in return for Ukraine asking for America to keep its commitment it made in the 90s? Or is it the Ukrainians who have been bleeding and dying for Europe's defense for 3 years and their own? I mean, I don't know. My God, man. My God. By the way, if you ask Grok whether or not Donald Trump's in a Russian propaganda bubble, which Grok is the AI software on Elon Musk's platform, his response will be, yes, it is rational to assume that Donald Trump might live in a Russian propaganda bubble. He has ties to individuals and media with Russian connections, and his statements often echo Russian narratives. Surprisingly, despite imposing some sanctions on Russia, he has not criticized Russian propaganda and has repeated its talking points. And then it provides inner circle ties to people who have been paid by Russian Today, media exposure, repetition of propaganda, policy action, social media influence. Look, I'm just listening to Grok. Okay, I'm just trying to listen to Elon's beautiful AI program. Grok. Now, none of this was particularly good news, okay? And I can see a few doomers in the chat. So I want to throw something at you guys. Trump right now, as much as it does, this full throttle kick in the door, shotgun approach, overwhelm everything, is different from the first time around. Donald Trump's approval rating isn't. He hasn't picked up a lot of new people this time around. Or if he has, he's lost an equivalent amount. First time when he went into office, he was at a 47% approval rating, which is historically low for the start of a president's first term. Second term, now it's 45. Now, if you go through this polling data, there's a few interesting things because, he's been president for just a month. And there's some things that are interesting, like Democrats who are willing to give Trump a chance have largely cut off that charitability and are now asking for Democrats to just kind of resist as much as possible. But you can also starting to see some differences, the beginnings of drift on Trump's different positions on how the American public think he's handling it. So let me read you some of this data. Trump's ratings on several issues that his administration has targeted in the first weeks of his presidency are similar to his overall rating. On immigration, it's 46. Foreign affairs, it's 44. Foreign trade, it's 42. The economy, it is 42. For Ukraine, it seems to be one of the lowest amounts, only tied for Israel-Palestine at 40%. 40%. And if you go down and you look at the data,
is a curd.
A slight majority of Americans, of about 6% majority, so it's outside the margin of error, believe that Donald Trump is doing a bad job in handling the situation in Ukraine. Now, a month into it, to immediately get have the public immediately turn against you, in this. Now, it's worse on the Israel-Palestine issue. It's a gap of 11. It's 40 to 51. So Americans really don't seem to like how he's handling, let's make a casino in the Gaza Strip. But when it comes to the situation in Ukraine, he's not polling well either. And I don't think, considering Zelensky polls better than him, considering people have seen the mass graves, I don't think people will pay attention to how bad it is. I don't think most Americans know how bad it is over there. How the Russians hunt civilians for sport, for fun, and then post the videos on social media to brag for it. It's called the human safari. It's a real thing. You can see it. And I think that some might not realize that, but enough of it gets out that they know that Putin's not a nice guy, that Putin has like an 8% approval rating in the United States. So if he's going out there and saying, oh, hey, Zelensky's a dictator. Oh, hey, maybe Ukraine will be Russia. Oh, hey, Ukraine doesn't need to be at the table. Oh, we'll concede this, concede this, concede this, concede this. And then you, 2 months into it, on February 24th, in 4 days, are like, wait a second, today's the anniversary of the war. I thought Trump said he was going to end it in 24 hours, didn't he? Well, now it's been like well over 1,000 hours. Why isn't the war over? And the longer it goes on and the worse the diplomatic relationship gets with the nation state that most Americans like, I don't think most Americans will be angry at Trump if he pisses off Putin. If he breaks down a relationship with the Ukrainians, the American people will not react positively. I don't know how much it will hurt his actual approval data, because it depends on how much Americans weigh the war in Ukraine as an important issue to them. But the polling data seems to indicate that so far, Americans do not trust the pathway Donald Trump is taking with Ukraine. And honestly, I think they're right to have that judgment. I just think people need to pay close attention soon, because he's pushing along with this plan, whether the Ukrainians or the Europeans like it or not. We'll see how far it goes. Keir Starmer has a 16% approval rating a few weeks ago. Oh, so what you're telling me is he has a quadruple Zelensky's rating at 4%? My God.